Theater of the mind versus physical terrain, today on Dungeon Craft. Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor DungeonMaster, and this channel is about running the ultimate game of Dungeons and Dragons. You can level up your game by subscribing and click that bell icon for notifications, and you'll be on your way. Today we're talking about the two big play styles, Theater of the Mind versus physical terrain. Now, you might assume, since I have a channel called Dungeon Craft and show you how to craft terrain, that I must be firmly in the terrain camp, but you'd be wrong. Both styles have distinct advantages and disadvantages. There are situations where Theater of the Mind is not only preferable but far superior to physical terrain, and situations where terrain has a lot of pluses. So we're going to be talking about those today, and it's not going to be like I'm going to choose one side or another. I'm going to show you how both sides change the way the Dungeon Master and players think about the game so that you can better decide which style to use in which situation. Theater of the Mind has three advantages. The first is it's fast and versatile. You can describe a battle with 10,000 combatants in an epic, massive battle, switch to ship-to-ship combat on the high seas, and then go to an underground temple complex in just a matter of seconds. 2, you don't have to build, buy, or store terrain. 3, you don't have to spend time setting up terrain, cleaning up terrain, or lugging it around. The disadvantage with Theater of the Mind is it really relies on the Dungeon Master's skill, ability to describe a situation so that everyone can understand it. And that can be really difficult if you have a large group of, say, more than 6 people. It demands that they're all paying attention and not looking at their cell phones or engaging in side conversations. And inevitably with Theater of the Mind, there's going to be disagreements over who could see what and who has cover. That's the first advantage of terrain. With terrain, there's no confusion over where everybody is situated, where they're looking, who has cover and who doesn't. You can see the orc here has cover behind the crate. 2, it helps the players think tactically. The wizard is hiding behind a pillar. If the dragon breathes fire on her, she can ask for advantage to her saving throw because she does have cover behind that pillar. That makes sense. It's reasonable. The party has surrounded the dragon, which is good because the breath weapon is his most dangerous attack, and it can only go in one direction. So the fighter on the side might bang on his shield with his sword to attract the dragon's attention, take the full brunt of that breath attack because he has the most hit points, and allow the cleric, the magic user, and the rogue to sneak up on the dragon from behind. The third reason is it's just cool. When my players come over and see my terrain all set up, and they're like, wow, it speaks to our childlike desire to play with toys again. I mean, who wouldn't want to play on this wizard's tower, just blow it up with a fireball? Again, if you're going to play with terrain, it's going to be expensive because you have to buy it, or time-consuming, you have to build it. And it can be inconvenient to drag it around Indianapolis in August in 85-degree heat in a suitcase if you're running something at Gen Con. Transitions can also be a problem. You could set up the entire dungeon on your living room or dining room table, you know, all at once and have everybody look down on it, but that could be difficult because one person on one end of the table can't always see what's happening on the other end of the table. Plus, it's kind of a pain to set up and take down. The last drawback of the terrain is tactics slow the game. People have referred to this as the tyranny of the grid, where everything just slows down and becomes a tactical exercise with everyone moving their miniatures just a certain amount of space, and that can make for a game that is just slow. To illustrate how these two different styles can really change the way the Dungeon Master approaches the game and the way the players approach the game, let's take a look at a specific example based on the Mines of Moria scene from the Fellowship of the Ring. In that scene, the heroes are being pursued by the Balrog. So if I were going to do that Theater of the Mind, I would describe the earth shaking and the heat from the Balrog, and then I would say, you charge across a narrow stone bridge, crossing a bottomless chasm, dodging heavy fire from orcs, the arrows whistling through the air, barely missing your feet. In the center of the bridge, you meet an orc wielding scimitar. He swings at you. His blow bounces off your shield. Roll to hit. 16, he fails his dex check and falls screaming into the abyss. That's dramatic. It's exciting because I've pinned them between two forces, but I've also placed them on the bridge. I, as the Dungeon Master, like a director, I told them the orc comes out of nowhere in the center of the bridge and they're fighting him, raising the tension. With terrain, it's going to go down very differently. I'm going to spend an entire afternoon crafting a bridge this thin, this long. I'm only going to use it one time, and the players are going to take one look at that bridge. I know this. I've played with them for 20 years. They're going to take one look at that bridge and say, I'm not stepping foot on that bridge. It looks dangerous. It took me a year to get Aragorn to 6th level. He's my favorite character. We'll take our chances with the Balrog. They'll cluster themselves at the base of the bridge with the Balrog on one side and the orcs running across the bridge to them on the other side. I know this because I built this wizard's tower with all these different levels and MC Escher stairs, and it's got this open atrium where you could fall to the bottom, and there are these bridges crisscrossing it, and none of my players would step foot on a bridge. They were terrified. They're supposed to be playing the world's mightiest heroes, and they're afraid that the bridges don't have handrails. That's the effect of terrain. It makes players think tactically, but also they become super cautious, whereas Theater of the Mind makes players think quickly and dramatically. So when do you use Theater of the Mind, and when do you use terrain? Well, this is where I'm going to save you a lot of time and money, and it's based on my extensive experience and screwing up a lot of games so you don't have to. The first situation is chase scenes. Chase scenes depend on speed. That's what creates the tension. Anything where you have a grid and you're moving little figures is going to slow things down. So whether the chase scene is through a marketplace, across rooftops, or on horseback, you're going to do a Theater of the Mind. There are other channels that offer mechanics on this. DM Scotty on his new channel, The Quest Giver, suggested maybe using a deck of cards to determine how far that you move ahead, and maybe one card makes you trip. But whatever you do, don't use a grid. Social encounters. You don't need to craft an entire tavern if all your players are doing in it is hiring NPCs, gathering information, and flirting with the serving wench. There's no reason to meticulously craft tables with little bits of food and spill drinks on them. The only reason you'd have a tavern is if you're going to have a brawl in the tavern where the patrons are werewolves and they're going to start eating people. Don't craft anything for an encounter that requires just charisma checks. Horror games. If you run a game like Call of Cthulhu, the last thing you want to have is terrain. You don't want the players thinking tactically, because the primary survival tactic in Call of Cthulhu is to just run away faster than the other players. Also, monsters are way scarier when they're kept off screen. It's tough to describe the blasphemous, unspeakable, Lovecraftian monster when it's this tall. This guy isn't unspeakable. He's very speakable. Once the players can see it, it's not scary anymore. Quick encounters. Let's say the characters have tracked a secret cult to their underground temple in the city, and there's a single guard outside. Now, this is the type of encounter that can take 20 minutes with the players planning out how to approach the guard and what distance he is, etc. And terrain will just extend that even longer. What you want to do is just say, look, there are 6 of you. There's a single guard. Everyone's going to roll a die. If you roll a 12, you knock him out or kill him or whatever. If you don't roll a 12, you still knock him out, but he gets to shout a warning to the people inside the temple. Epic battle scenes. Although D&D developed from tabletop war games, it's kind of surprising that it doesn't work really well moving it back to an epic battle. That's because in a tabletop game like Warhammer, there are 2 players. Tactics are important because they're competing against each other, and they're heavily invested because their character is the entire army. In an RPG, you're only concerned about that one character. Even if you're having the players command, say, a contingent of troops, I find they're really not invested as they are in their own individual character. They just want to find out what happens to them. So what you want to do is do a Theater of the Mind where you describe the volleys of arrows darkening the sky and all the mud, the blood, the fog of war, the screaming. Then focus on the player characters and the immediate battle that's happening around them. The Stormbringer game, later reprinted as Elric, which is just another version of RuneQuest, had an interesting system for epic battles. The DungeonMaster just states a level of difficulty and says, look, you got to roll a 5 on a 20-sided die. It's a saving throw versus death. If you roll lower than that, you died in the battle. If you want, you can combine this with Ultimate Dungeon terrain and just put down some interesting pieces like a tree, a burned out tree, maybe a rock. Place all the combatants in the center of the field and just say, okay, this is just what you can see off the terrain. That's the fog of war. We're just going to roll out this combat because this is what is happening to you. Then I will tell you what happened with the rest of the battle. So terrain works better when you have a small skirmish like that, when range or cover might make a difference. In a situation where the terrain is critical, like there's a pit of green slime in the center of a room, or a big boss battle at the climax of the session. The boss can get his own lair, and you can speed up transitions by having a second smaller piece of UDT with the boss's lair pre-built on it and just plop it on the table. So this is why UDT is so great. It bridges the gap between Theater of the Mind and physical terrain. You can get the advantage of using the miniatures, seeing how they're facing, seeing who has cover, but you don't have to clutter up your entire table or build out an entire dungeon. You're just focused on the immediate what is happening to the characters at that time. I'll often just place the enemy combatants in the center of the terrain. I'll just plop down 6 orcs and say to the players, alright, put your miniature on the terrain in the center where you want your character to be. Then I'll build the terrain around them, placing only what's necessary, like the entrance, because they might have to exit if they need to retreat, or terrain that could provide them cover, like a crate. I only place terrain that's going to provide a tactical advantage for one side or another, or might obstruct someone's point of view. Don't worry about small scenery like chairs and desks and rugs. That stuff you can either add later, but you don't even have to have it. It's really not an integral part of the game. Like social encounters, searching, you don't need terrain for that. If you want to know more about how I make and use Ultimate Dungeon terrain, check out these videos over here and click that Dungeon Door logo to subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. May all your rolls be 20s.